Hello, this is Spike Chartel coming to you with another video. This time about a religitard of a different color. Now, usually when I talk about idiots that believe in things on little to shoddy evidence, I'm talking about people that believe in magic men in the sky. But this time, I'm talking about a different kind of religitard. One that believes in ideologies based in half-truths, public sympathy, emotion, and sometimes just outright falsehoods and lies. I am, of course, talking about your garden variety gender warrior. People so deluded as to think that one sex has it rougher than the other in Western society, while ignoring the basic truth that things aren't, all sunshine and roses for either men or women. Gender warriors are better known as feminists and men's rights activists, respectively, though this particular one that I'm about to rip on is of the more popular feminist movement, so thus is less likely to face any real criticism in any kind of mainstream media, as Western society and its evil patriarchal oppression tends to be more protective of the women they seek to oppress than the men they are obviously empowering. Kind of like how the Nazis protected the Jews. Wait a tick. That isn't how that went down at all. Well, never mind. Let's get on with it and see what this clown has to say.
Hey, here are 5 stupid things I've noticed about the men's rights movement. It's misogynistic.
And let me guess, your movement isn't misandrist in any way, shape, or form. But you know what? I'm not being fair to this reject, who looks like Joshua Feinstein after a 3-month meth bender. Let's let him continue.
This is the one inescapable fact about the men's rights movement that makes it impossible for me to support. Are there legitimate issues raised by reasonable voices within the movement? Absolutely, and I'll talk about a few of those in a minute, but the movement itself is essentially misogynistic. And it's not even that it's actively anti-woman, although some of it obviously is. Most of it isn't the misogyny of the wife-beater or the determined sexist. It's the blindness, the insensitivity of men who can't or won't look beyond their own interests. It's the senseless panic of men who view every feminist gain as a masculine loss. Here are a few examples of the sort of misogynistic things I've noticed about the men's rights movement.
Wow. Just wow. Yes, you're right. The MRA is comprised of a lot of alarmist people that view any feminist victory as a threat. Of course, the same thing could be said about the feminist movement as well, but I guess you're going to ignore that, huh? Good thing there are people like me to point out the hypocrisy of gender warriors, isn't it? Otherwise, no one would ever call out your side on these kinds of things. I remember a few years back, the MRAs, they were going to have a convention in my town in Detroit. And they were peaceful about it, wanting to get together and talk about the things that they talk about. And there were people lined up and down the fucking streets protesting it. There was so much pressure to shut this event down, not only from the protesters, but from the news media as well, local media, mind you, that the hotel that they had originally planned to have the convention in ended up kicking them out, and they had to go to another hotel. Now, you may disagree with them. That's fine. We live in a country where people can say whatever fool thing pops into their head. But when one group tries and successfully silences another group because they don't like what that group is saying, that's censorship. Not that feminists have a problem with censorship, especially when it's ideas and art they don't like, or facts and statistics that prove their points are either inflated or completely made up. But the point is that the MRA group that wanted to have their convention in Detroit posed no real threat to feminism, as it's not the side of the gender wars that the media or public usually side with. It wasn't even going to end up in any kind of MRA victory, as it isn't a movement that's taken seriously by the vast majority of the population, And yet there were hundreds, if not thousands of people on the street protesting and demanding that none of the hotels in the city allow them to have their damn convention. Of course, had the shoe been on the other foot, well, we all know how the media would have covered that. And I'm willing to bet those same hotels wouldn't have bowed to public pressure, but I digress. You say that it's full of men that can't see past their own interests. Yet your own side is guilty of the same behavior. Actually, too, I might point out, MRA isn't even only men. There are women in it, too. And, just like there are men in the feminist movement. And you know what? Both sides are still, just to reiterate to everyone listening, both sides are equally silly. Just so that you don't forget that point. Now, to the person who I'm ripping on here, your side actually tends to react to things that are less of a perceived threat and seem to view any kind of dissenting voice as a threat to all womankind. As if men wanting to keep our foreskins and not be locked up on false accusations of assault were such horrible things to ask for. But whatever, right? Anyway, let's keep going.
It attacks feminine privilege while ignoring male privilege. This whole concept of feminine privilege is hilarious to me. It's not that I deny that feminine privilege exists in our culture, it's just that I think it's absurd to try and equate it with male privilege. The benefits of feminine privilege include having men pay for your drinks and open doors for you. The benefits of male privilege include getting to run the motherfucking world. I think I'd rather pay for my own drinks.
Wow. There you go again. Doing the same thing that you accuse the MRA of doing. Minimalizing one while blowing the other out of proportion. You bring up the most asinine of female privilege, while throwing out the supposed best example of male privilege. And honestly, men getting to run everything in the Western world is debatable. It really is. But I digress on that, as that point isn't even important to what I'm saying here. So here's the thing. If it were just that women were getting free drinks and having the door held for them, I don't think there would be that many men bitching. I really don't. I think if that were the extent of it, then even the most misogynistic asshole in the world wouldn't have two fucking things to say about female privilege. So here are some of the things that you forgot to mention. Winning over 80% of custody cases. Not having their paychecks garnished by the state to pay for children they didn't want. As a matter of fact, on that point, they can either abort the child before it's born in pretty much 99% of the Western world, or give it up for adoption after the fact. Being taken seriously when the victim of physical assault. Not being told how to sit on public transit, or that they're taking up too much room on public transit. Not having to sign up for selective service to have the right to vote in elections. Receiving, on average, 60% shorter sentences for the same crime. And that's if they're even charged and convicted of said crime. Not being held accountable when it's found out that they filed false assault charges against someone. If men are running everything, then we sure are giving ourselves the short end of the stick here. Not to say that there aren't aspects to being a woman that doesn't suck, but on the same token, there are things that suck about being a man as well. Anyway, what's next?
Seeks to minimize concern over domestic violence. Sure, violence against women is terrible, says the men's rights movement member, feigning half-assed interest in the issue he's about to try to undermine. But what about violence against men? You never hear about that. As though there's this silent epidemic of woman-on-man domestic abuse. And you know what? Maybe there is. And if so, that's a terrible thing. I don't support anyone beating up anyone as a general principle. Yes, I will take that bold stance. All we know for sure about woman-on-man domestic abuse is there are far, far fewer reported incidents of it than man-on-woman domestic abuse. And if there really is this epidemic, if wives really are beating up their husbands as often as many within the men's rights movement suggest, why aren't more of these husbands coming forward to report these crimes? Could it possibly be because of the same misogynistic macho bullshit that created the men's rights movement in the first place? That these husbands don't want to come forward and report their wives because they feel like getting beaten up by a woman makes them less of a man? Because they're not supposed to beat us up. It's supposed to be the other way around, right? Here's what I do know for sure. CASA runs a shelter for battered women in Hagerstown, near where I live. There's a waiting list. Here are two more stupid things about the men's rights movement.
Wow. Just wow, you keep amazing me with hypocrisy. So you're going to bitch about your adversaries minimalizing domestic violence, while blaming the domestic violence against men on the patriarchy, aka the feminist Satan. Of course, had you actually looked into this, like I have, you would realize that the rates of domestic violence between men and women are pretty much split down the middle. There's a CDC report from 2010, which, by the way, is hardly an MRA-biased organization, and which I will include a link to in the description, which pretty much cited that all domestic violence cases reported that around 45% of those were perpetrated by women, while the other 55% were perpetrated by men. Of course, you do bring up the point that men may not report based on shame. Never mind the fact that you turn it into yet another evil plot of patriarchy Satan. The fact is, though, the 45%, 55% margins are probably closer to 50-50 when you do factor in not only the men that are too ashamed to report these cases, but the ones that do report and aren't taken seriously by police and a justice system that seems to only care about domestic violence when a woman is the victim. Actually taking that into account, the amount of women perpetrating this crime could actually be slightly higher. But we don't really know, as again, the justice system only focuses on one side of it, and because of that, the CDC's information was limited in their study. Truth be told here, though, both sides of the gender war minimalize domestic violence against the other side. So don't act like it's just the MRA when the feminists ignore the kind of studies like the one I just mentioned.
It discredits efforts to address serious issues. My problem with the men's rights movement is with the movement as a whole. I don't automatically reject every issue that might be raised from within it. For example, there are some in the MRM who have pointed out that it's unfair that men in the United States have to register with selective service when they turn 18, while women don't have to. I agree. Others have suggested that family courts might be unfairly biased in favor of mothers and against fathers when it comes time to deciding things like child custody. I think that's a serious issue. And again, I think we as a society should be just as intolerant of domestic abuse that victimizes men as we have become, relatively recently, I would like to point out, of domestic violence that victimizes women. It's just that it would be a lot easier to stir people to positive action on these issues if they weren't being raised by a movement that is essentially a petulant, sexist reaction to feminism.
You mean like how modern feminism is a sexist, petulant reaction to anything male? Let's be honest for a minute here. There was a point in time when feminism did serve a purpose. Though, it's always been plagued by the radicals and crazies, much like the MRA is. Lest we forget the temperance movement, they gave us such lovely things as prohibition. Of course, in this day and age, that movement has pretty much won. And that isn't a bad thing either. What is bad, though, is a movement that now seems to be more concerned with what kind of video game is in my PlayStation, or what ratio of male to female characters there are in the movies I watch, instead of the United States government's continued support of Saudi Arabia, a country where women get lashes for the crime of being a rape victim. Where are the feminist protesters in Washington calling for a trade embargo against Saudi Arabia? Now, there's a feminist battle cry I would actually support, as it would actually be about doing something that means something instead of just trying to censor ideas and art they don't like.
It's unnecessary. If they care about equality, why do they call themselves feminists? I've actually had people ask me this question, and the answer is because women, that is, members of the feminine sex, are the group of people that has historically been mistreated and are now seeking rights equal to the group that mistreated them. Feminism is still necessary because women are still treated unequally in our culture relative to men. The men's rights movement is unnecessary and ridiculous because we, that is, those of us with penises, dominate business, government, religion, you name it. And we always have. We've never had to face what women have to face. Being paid less, offered fewer opportunities, punished for our personal ambition and assertiveness, being treated as less capable just because of what sex we are, and barring some unforeseen and overwhelming victory by radical feminism, we never will. The men's rights movement isn't about gender equality, it's about tipping the inequality even more in the favor of men. So fuck it. The hardest part is only picking 5. Catch you next time.
You know what, though? It's all unnecessary when you get down to it. I mean, do we really need 2 opposing groups whining about how much more oppressed they are than the other when it comes to gender? A lot of what I said earlier applies to what this bearded asshole just said in this last segment. Like about the female privileges he conveniently forgot to mention earlier. Are there issues unique to women that need to be solved in the Western world? Absolutely. I, for one, would like to see an end to holy roller politicians trying to regulate women's reproductive systems and rights. On the flip side of that, I would also like to see an end to alleged leftist politicians putting all reproductive responsibility at the feet of men as well. So in closing, I would like to say this to all people listening. Don't be a gender warrior. Please don't. And I'm not just saying this to people that lean towards feminist tendencies either, but the ones that blindly support the MRA as well. Gender warriors are narcissistic assholes who are really only looking for a place to be judgmental of others, while being able to practice hypocrisy unopposed. The fact of the matter is, it's no picnic for either sex. I leave you with the wise words of Plato, something that you should remember whenever you're thinking of taking a side in the gender wars, and that is this: be kind, for everyone has a hard battle. Thank you, and have a good day.